Erin Jones has worked in and around schools in different capacities for over 30 years. She's worked and done consultation for nonprofits, government agencies, and businesses. She's worked and lived in 5 states, from the East Coast to the Midwest to the West Coast, in communities that were predominantly white, to communities that were predominantly Black communities, to those that boasted dozens of languages and cultures. She's been recognized locally and nationally for her work in education and equity. She's also received recognition as an athlete and was invited to try out for 2 WNBA teams.
Buenos dias, guten Morgen, bonjour, salam, shalom. Good morning. Hi. So I feel like I have to follow suit now. I am without the shoes and the hair, 6 feet tall, black. I am wearing the Air Max double stack, so that adds about 1.5 inches. And then I have at least half a foot of fro. So, and it is a red fro, and I got my Nike outfit on. And what is important about that is I actually have not been home. I was supposed to go home last night. I spoke to the Supreme Court Justices of New Mexico 2 days ago, and then hung out with them at their conference yesterday. And then our flight was delayed yesterday. And so I stayed at the airport last night, and I happen to have an outfit left in my suitcase. So this is what you get today. But I am really excited to be here today talking with you all about resilience. I want to read, just because I'm an educator, I want to read the American Psychology definition of resilience, because it is, as I think about my own journey, even today getting here, I think this is so fitting. Resilience is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. So yesterday, I opened the Supreme Court Justices Conference on, what day is it? It's Friday. I gotta go backwards, Wednesday. So I flew out Tuesday to New Mexico. I've never been. It was my 41st state. So my goal is to get to every state. There are some states that I've not gotten to because we can't figure out really what I'm gonna do there, but I gotta get to Hawaii and Alaska, but there's some in the middle, like I haven't been to Nebraska yet, I haven't been to Wyoming yet, but I was in my 41st state this week, and I don't know how I ended up talking to the Supreme Court justices. But I spoke at a justice conference in Minneapolis 2 years ago, and one of the judges heard me and said, "We've got this conference, you need to come to, have you ever been to Albuquerque?" I said, "No, it's my 41st state. Get me there." And so I got to speak to them on Wednesday morning. And I will tell you, I've never been so nervous preparing for a speech. And I don't write speeches, I don't ever write speeches. I come and show up, and I know kind of where I'm gonna go, but I was like, I'm a teacher. What do I say to Supreme Court justices and judges? And what is amazing is as I got there early and I stood at the back of the room and watched them come in, what I realized is, much like you, they're people. They're people who are experiencing loss and struggle. And imagine being a Supreme Court justice in a state right now watching our Supreme Court justices, right? Imagine what that's like when you're trying to do the right thing and people are watching at the national level what's happening. Imagine the critique of your job right now. And so I'm watching these people walk in, and they are tired. I can feel it. I can feel the energy in the room. They're tired. They're stressed out. Here's the thing about judges. You're never going to make everyone happy. Half that room is going to be upset with you, right? On any given day, half the room is going to be angry with you. And so as I watched them come in, I realized that, much like you probably, they're walking through this season of time exhausted and stressed and worried about what the future holds. And so this whole message about resilience that I've been sharing with teachers for the last 6 months is the same message that they needed to hear. And what was so great, standing ovation afterwards. And something had told me, stay for another day afterwards. Stay for as long as you can at their conference. I spent all day yesterday, the day after my speech, with people at my table just coming to sit and talk with me. They're humans, just like you. They may have big titles, but they're humans just like you. And they lost people during COVID. They lost friends because of politics. And so my message today is going to be really similar to that we are all humans trying to move through the world. And I sit on only 3 boards. I sat on 5 boards. So when I think about fundraising, I have sat on a number of boards. So I sat on College Spark, just timed out of that one. I sit on the Girl Scouts board for Western Washington. I helped co-found a cultural center in Tumwater, Washington, which is right out, I live in Lacey. And it's a center that we started about 3 years ago to help support communities of color in the North Thurston area, because there are a lot of us, but we don't have a community. And so fundraising for me is something really important, that I'm not just here talking to you about it because I am a public speaker. This is something I'm really committed to. How do we think about fundraising differently? As I look at the news and watch, I don't know if you've been watching the Fearless Fund and what happened to them recently. As a Black woman who's had to raise money, I ran for state superintendent. If you're not aware, I'm the first Black woman in the state to run for any statewide office. I lost that race by 1 point. Which I'm really glad about. Because I would have had to run schools during the pandemic, which was not a fun thing. I have talked to our state superintendent many times, and every time he looks at me like, I think you won this thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm smiling still, buddy. I'm looking younger. I just turned 53 last week, by the way, so holding it down for the postmenopausal ladies. But as someone who has run for office, so much of running for public office, especially at the state level, but I would say here in King County, even school boards, is about raising money. And do you know, women of color in particular, we don't raise money at the same rates. It's hard for us to raise money. Now, here's what I'll say. My claim to fame in running for office, I raised more money than my opponent. Even though he won, I raised about $10,000 more. Y'all, I'm a baller. But I know how hard it is for people of color to raise money. And so this whole conversation about raising money and thinking about how are we giving access to people who don't have access right now is something that I am personally really passionate about, because it's affected me personally. And so I feel really honored to be able to be in front of you today to talk about something that for me is not just an intellectual exercise, it's something that I have had to live through, it's something I continue to live through, it's something that I'm really passionate about. And the last thing I'll say, and then I want to jump into the message I want to share, is I think right now as a country, not just right now, but I think in the last 20 or so years, something that has become really apparent to me, I think partly having been at the executive level in state government, as I watch us 30,000 feet, we have this idea that there's only so much. We think about money in this country like it's a pizza. And if I give you a piece of pizza, that's a piece of pizza that I don't have for me. And here's how I want us to think about money and fundraising. Because I've watched this. I've watched fundraisers. Oh, I'm going to get you first. I'm going to get you first, and I'm going to get you for a lot. Because if I get you first, then she doesn't get you, or he doesn't get you, or whatever, right? We do this thing. Instead of, what if we collectively thought about what we all need to thrive? And I really believe there's more than enough resources out there for everybody, especially here in King County, y'all. When I think about Boeing and Google and just all the organizations that are here, there is more than enough for all of us. What if we were to look at this differently and think about, what does it take for our whole community to thrive? How do we collectively make that happen? Instead of, I'm going to go get this piece, I'm going to hold on to it for my people. Instead of, how do I work alongside you with your organization to make sure that we get what we need in our community? And so that is how I think about fundraising. It's how I think about the work that I do around working with nonprofits and serving on boards of nonprofits, is how do we kind of shift this capitalist message and think about thriving? And that's going to require really rethinking how we think about money and how we think about access. And it's a hard thing because we have built some cultural norms. Oh, I see my book. Okay. Everybody say hello to my assistant, Callie. This is Callie. Thank you, friend. Callie has been on a journey. I have been, I think, in 6 states in the last 11 days, 12 days, 2 weeks, and this poor one has had to fly with me to Boston. That is a story in itself. On my birthday, we got stuck in the Boston airport because the plane broke, and there was not a mechanic in the Boston area, so they had to fly a plane from Seattle to Boston to pick us up. Yeah, that was not fun. And then the whole airport shut down. We got into the last open restaurant, I think about 15 minutes before the kitchen closed. On my birthday. Yo. But this one has just soldiered on with me, so she drives me everywhere and takes care of me. So everybody give a hand to Callie, please. Talk about resilience. I told you I am living out this resilience thing. Like, we are practicing this thing. But I want you all to think differently as you think about fundraising. Instead of thinking about competing for dollars, how do we have a collective conversation about what would thriving and flourishing look like for us as community? And how do we collectively make sure that everybody has what they need to thrive? I do a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And one of the things I say to big government folks and big companies when I talk with them is, the reality is some of y'all have stuff you don't need. You may want it, but you don't need it. And you're holding on to it because you can. And here's the truth, because I've worked in education now for 33 years. We're going to pay a price one way or the other. We pay a price when we don't fully fund schools. We pay a price when not everyone has access to great health care. We pay a price when we're not thinking about housing costs. We all pay a price. And guess what? Y'all rich folks, I'm not talking about us here, I'm talking about them out there. Okay. Y'all rich folks who have your Teslas and all that stuff are going to pay for a prison system that actually doesn't need to be funded if you choose to not pay for education and healthcare and housing and quality food for everyone. And so I want us to really reimagine this fundraising thing, and let's not do it like the businesses out there. Let's think about it differently, and let's think about what would it take for us to actually collaborate. Again, I'm going to go back, because I'm a teacher, I'm going to go back to this definition of resilience, because I really think it says something special to us. Successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment. We need to change how we do business. And I think there's been this model, and I've been doing work in philanthropy for probably the last 25 years now. We need to reimagine how we do this thing and stop being competitors and be collaborators. So there are two questions that I want to ask you today as I challenge us, and I'm going to include myself in this, to think about. I don't ever give a speech that I would not also give to me. It's really important to me that I live out the speeches I deliver. I'm going to challenge us as we think about resilience in this moment in time, in this season of time. And I've been literally in every region of the country in the last 2 weeks. I'm in New Mexico. Yeah, I've been in every region of this country. And here's what I will tell you. We're in crisis as a country. And you don't need me to tell you that. You see that if you open up TikTok or X, if you dare. I don't know that I dare. I have not dared to open X for about a week now. But we're in crisis. And so as I think about how are we going to respond in this moment, I'm an optimist, but I think I'm really kind of between optimism and realism. And I think there was a time in my life where I would have said, oh, everything's just going to turn out fine. Everything's going to be okay. I'm not that girl right now. I'm in a position of saying, okay, here's what is possible out here. Let's prepare for that. Let's not do this, la, 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 la. It's just gonna be okay. I'm just going to wake up in 6 months and it's all going to, let's not do that. I don't think that's helpful. Let's look out here and let's actually have a plan. In fact, I've been working on a second book for the last year and a half. And I stopped writing in probably February. I was just frozen. And I got unfrozen yesterday. And I realized I want to write a book for January of 2025. I want to write a book that will help us move into this very real possibility of a moment in our history that will help people move through it, with an idea towards flourishing and not just quitting. Because what I feel as I travel the country is there are real sign that I saw in Spokane last week. Y'all, I've been everywhere in our state too, by the way. Not just states, I've been in our state. I was in Spokane last week, and there was a sign on an ammo store that said this, and I forgot to take a picture of it, but it said this: "The election is coming, stock up on ammo." Actually said that on the big sign of the ammo store on a main street, Francis Street in Spokane. I don't want to be that person. But I want to be aware that those people are here. And so how do we show up to them differently? So I have two questions that I want you to think about today, that I am thinking about every day. Number one, why do you do what you do where you do it? Why do you do this work for the organization that you do it with? Why in the community that you're in? I think because I've been in K-12 education for so long, when I would do speeches to teachers, I would always ask them, what's your why story? Why do you do teaching? But what I have learned over time is that context really matters. So why the organization that you're working for? Because here's what I also know at 53, is you may have the right why, but you're doing the wrong what and the wrong where. Or you may have lost your why, and you need to find a different why. Or maybe it's a different what. Or maybe you're realizing the community that you're in no longer needs you, and you need to be in a different place. So I want you to think about, why do you do what you do where you do it? And then the second question, and this is a new question that I've been asking. Some reason I've been doing a lot of work with firefighters. I really don't know how that happens. But I've literally been traveling the country speaking to firefighters. And here's the similarity that I've realized between firefighters and teachers. Both are putting out fires. If you have not been in a school lately, that may not make sense to you. But y'all, there are fires happening in schools right now. And sometimes they're physical. But here's the similarity between firefighters and teachers. And you might see yourself in this. They're putting out fires. They're experiencing some trauma. Imagine being someone who likes to save people watching folks burn. But then they're not allowed to talk about it. Because the culture of the fire service is you gotta be tough, can't be vulnerable. But they've witnessed stuff. Y'all, teachers are witnessing things in students' lives that are traumatic. I spent my whole teaching career teaching in Title I schools with the poorest students coming out of some pretty severe trauma. And then I adopted a little girl whose mother took her life, whose dad was in prison for 27 years. And I realized I was not only dealing with those stories at school, I now had that story in my house, but I wasn't doing counseling. I had 2 other kids to take care of and a husband. And I wonder how many of you who are givers are giving and giving and giving, and you're not vulnerable with people. Because you got to be tough, and you got to get this work done. And so here's the second question that I've been asking people wherever I go. What are you doing to put the oxygen mask on yourself? Been on a lot of planes, so that analogy is really appropriate. And if you've not been on a plane recently, I know you all have heard this. Put the mask on yourself before you put it on your children. How often, though, do those of us who are givers naturally want to put it on them first? And here's what happens. You put it on them first as the plane's going down. Guess what? You lose oxygen. And you're no longer able to help anyone. How many of you, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I want you to think about this. How many of you have been putting the oxygen mask on everybody but yourself? In fact, I want to see hands. How many of you have been putting the oxygen mask on everybody but yourself? Yeah. And so today I'm going to ask you, what are you doing? What's the oxygen mask for you? So even though for me today, I stayed in a hotel, I have a practice. I wake up in the morning and I do meditation. I listen to either some music or a sermon or something. I'm a Jesus girl who doesn't call herself a Christian. Some of y'all, that makes sense too. But I do meditation every morning for about 15 minutes, no matter where I am. Just stop. Because I'm a doer. And I got to just stop. And that started with just 5 minutes, and then it translated 10 minutes, then now about 15 minutes every morning. So spirit, mind, body. I listen to a podcast or read a book or write every day for at least 20 minutes. Usually it's more like 45 minutes. And then last thing, I run 30 miles a week. I would not recommend that for most people, but that's what my body needs. Know your body. Do something. Dance, swim, skate, walk. I am a crazy walking lady too. In fact, in Lacey, I was at the Fred Meyer probably about 6 months ago, and this police officer started running towards me. And she was making eye contact, so I knew she was running towards me. But she had a big smile on her face with all her gear on. And I'm like, I don't know if I should be scared and I should be running too, but she's got a smile on her face. And she got right up to me. And she said, oh my gosh, you're the walking lady. The police talk about me in Lacey because I literally walk everywhere, and I am known as the walking lady. And of course, at 6 feet tall with a big red afro in Lacey, they all know who I am. And I said, please don't run at a black person again. I don't care how big your smile is. I was about to have a heart attack. But I am a crazy walker too. I love getting outside. I would encourage you to get outside, even in the rain. There's something really powerful that happens when we're out in nature. And I want to challenge you, if you have not been out moving, start with 5 minutes, kind of like I did with meditation. Start with 5 minutes. Push it to 10. Push it to 15. If you can get to 20 minutes a day, that is a really powerful thing. But we have got to put the air mask on ourselves. So I want to challenge you as I am talking today to think about, what are you doing to put that mask on yourself? Because you cannot care for a community, cannot fundraise for a community effectively if you are not first fundraising for yourself. And it's so easy. We can put our community in front of us and say, oh, but I'm supporting these people. But if you are not alive anymore because you burned yourself out, that community cannot benefit from your brilliance. I was raised at a time where taking care of yourself was called selfish. I want to reframe that. We have to invest. We cannot give out of empty. So how are you filling yourself up? And I would encourage you, that has to be a daily endeavor. It can't just be, once a week, or I'm going to do this. So I was in New Mexico for 2 days, and I did a keynote, but then I made sure that each day I walked about 5 miles. I build that in, even when I'm working. I build in. I also am a nap taker. I have no shame. I turned to the Supreme Court justice and said, I am taking a nap. I'm going up to my room and taking a nap, and I don't care if y'all have thoughts about that. I know what I need. But can you take a nap? Right? We have got to rest in order to play the long game. Resilience is about staying in the game. And part of that is resting. So why do you do what you do, where you do it? And then what are you doing to fill your cup? I also want to share 3 strategies with you that I am thinking about and training people in to move through the season and time. There are some of you who are going to make asks of companies. You're going to want to ask for money because you want to support a minoritized community, whether that's Black folks or immigrants or trans people. And there's some companies right now that for political reasons, they're going to say, oh, we don't want any part of that DEI stuff. By the way, I was just on the Dr. Phil show. Don't watch it. Don't ask me where you can watch it. That was a hot mess. But here's why I share this. I practiced the 3 things. The reason I was on the show was because I'm a baller. And I have needed a court to play on. And I've been practicing these 3 strategies I'm about to share with you, but I needed a court to play on. My husband was not happy about me going on Dr. Phil. He's like, Erin, you've seen him, right? I said, yeah, I have a long time ago. I haven't watched him recently, but I know what he's about. And my brother-in-law is Jesse Jones, Cairo News. Okay? So I called Jesse and I called Jesse. And by the way, we call him that, Jesse Jones. Is Jesse Jones coming to dinner tonight? That's what we call him. So imagine him times 2, that's who I'm married to. So everybody's like, oh, he's so big, and so you haven't seen his brother yet. But I called Jesse and I said, Jesse, what do you think about me being on Dr. Phil? What do you think about that? He said, girl. He said, but you know what? You're the person. If anybody's going to be on the show to talk about DEI, it's you, and I think you can handle yourself. So I ended up on the show and did a great job on the show. I did all the things that I talk about with people, and in the very last, literally his last monologue, I challenged him on something, and he basically called me the B word to end the show, which got cut out, of course, of the final production. But here is why I don't regret having been on that show, because this is America right now. And I want to share with you 3 strategies that I'm using, and I'll explain how Phil, he doesn't get to be called doctor anymore because he's not certified. He's not certified, and he did not earn that designation, in my opinion. Right now, he's not earning that designation right now. So I'm going to share with you the 3 strategies, but then I'm also going to share with you why I believe Phil is showing up the way that he is in the world. And you may have a Phil in your life. I think all of us probably have a Phil McGraw in our lives right now. And so strategy number 1, choose gratitude every day. Do you know that gratitude scientifically changes our brain chemistry? When we choose to be grateful for things, it literally reforms the dendrites in our brain. Do you know that you can change your brain chemistry? And so I want to encourage you. One of my friends did her PhD thesis on gratitude, and what she learned is that you can literally rewire your brain by choosing to be grateful every day. Not once a week, not once a month. It has to be an everyday practice. You can rewire your brain. And here's why that rewiring is important. When you have rewired your brain using gratitude, it creates something called a positive neural network. So suddenly you have this positive network. And what that does, it doesn't make you Pollyanna. What it does is it allows you, when there are fires burning, to see hope, to see opportunity, even when things are falling apart. Week before my birthday, my favorite aunt passed away. 3 days before she passed away, something told me to send her a video message. I knew that she was ill. And what do you say to someone who's ill when you call them on the phone? How are you doing? I know life sucks for you right now. And so I wasn't sure what to say to her, but what my gut told me is send her a message and tell her how awesome she's been for you during your lifetime. Tell her how well she's loved by her community. And I did that on Friday. And then Monday morning when I woke up to a message from my cousin that she had passed away in the middle of the night. And he said, but she played your message. And so even though losing my aunt was incredibly devastating, I was so grateful that I trusted my gut and sent her that message on Friday. So I want to encourage you that even when things are falling apart for you in your life, I'm going to challenge you to find something to be grateful for. And here's another thing that's really important to me, especially as a teacher. I don't believe in just talking about a thing. We're going to practice the thing today. So here's what I want to do. I am going to turn my timer on my phone, and I am going to give you a minute. And wherever you are, I want you to turn and talk in groups of no bigger than 3. And share at least one thing that you're grateful for today. If you want to do 2 or 3 each, you are more than welcome to do that. But here's the beauty of gratitude. It's not the size of your gratitude that changes your brain chemistry. It's the practice of being grateful that changes your brain chemistry. So even if it's a really tiny thing, or 2 or 3 really tiny things, that will change your brain chemistry. And so I'm going to give you 1 minute. And in groups of 2 or 3, I want you to turn and share something that you're grateful for. Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thank you. So here's my challenge to you. How many of you, by raise of hands, could have gone on for another minute or 2 or 5? Yeah. I want to challenge you today, as you move throughout the day, to find opportunities to share things that you're grateful for. Let's build a culture of gratitude. Let's build that culture, and let's collectively change our brain chemistry. I think one of the things that I find, I teach an online class every Monday and Friday, which anyone is welcome to join. And so if you're interested in joining a class, I do a class on Mondays called Equity Fishbowl, and it's about all things related to equity and education. And then Fridays, today, I can't believe it. I'm like, what day is it today? Yeah, it's Friday. I teach a class called Becoming, and it's about identity. And we talk about things that are happening in the news and how our identities shape how we experience those things. So I have a trans student in my class, and 2 non-binary students, and 3 students who identify as queer, and a retired grandma, and 2 college students. It's an amazing array of people, but we talk about identity. And we start every class with gratitude, every single class. But one of the things that we've talked about quite often, especially in the Equity Fishbowl, is this reality that right now it feels like we have no power to change anything of significance in the world. It just feels like there's these big things. And what can I do? You can start by being grateful and infecting other people with that practice of being grateful. And so one of the things that I've challenged my students to think about is, when it feels like the world is just too big and I don't have control, what do you have control of? You have control of how you show up in the world. And so one of the first things that we can do is be grateful for ourselves. And then I want to challenge you in your organizations to practice gratitude. So we start every class with a gratitude moment, and everybody whips around our Zoom classroom and they share gratitude. I train all of our deputies for the state government. We start every class in the chat. Everybody shares something that they're grateful for. I was the DEI trainer for Puget Sound Energy for the whole company. And they now have a safety moment and a gratitude moment to start every single staff meeting that they do. I want to challenge you to think about how you can make gratitude a practice in your everyday life. If you're a parent of children, as you're waking them up, taking them to school, sitting down for a meal, driving to a practice, going to the playground, could you practice gratitude with your children? Maybe with your partner. So I'm going to challenge you to think about, where are the places in your life and your work that you could make gratitude part of your practice? What if all of us were to change our brain chemistry and then affect those around of us and change their brain chemistry? What if we just showed up in space differently? So gratitude is practice number 1. Practice number 2, and this is really the one that I had to show evidence of with Mr. Phil, is something that I call brave spaces. How many of you are familiar with the idea of safe spaces? Okay, I don't think they exist. And here's my argument. I was an award-winning middle school teacher. I love 12-year-olds. I love 11, 12, and 13-year-olds. I know that makes me weird. I will own that. You gotta be a little weird and crazy to love 11, 12, and 13-year-olds. I am that girl, okay? I love their energy. They're here one minute and they're the next and down. I mean, it's just like, and I am just right here. I'm just right here. And being tall helps, because usually they're all smaller than me. So that helps. High school, I did high school a couple years. I was like, yeah, they're too big. I want the little ones. But not the little ones, because I want to be able to talk to them. So I love middle school children. But here's what I realized as a middle school teacher. There is no way to create a space where every single student in a room is safe all the time. Because maybe you're neurodivergent, maybe you're on the autism spectrum, maybe ADD, maybe ADHD, maybe OCD, whatever it is that you have, at any point in time, there may be a time where you don't feel comfortable. Maybe we're talking about a piece of history that touches you differently than it touches other students. Maybe you just lost someone in your family, but you haven't told anybody yet. I don't think it's possible to create a space that is safe for everybody at all times. What I want to create, though, is a space that is safe enough for everyone to be brave. Safe enough for everyone to be brave. And so here are some dynamics that I insist on. So there's some non-negotiables for me, but I want you to think about, for you, what would it take to create a space that's safe enough for you to be brave? But here's some non-negotiables for me. As the facilitator of a space, whether I'm doing a keynote or teaching a class or coaching a team, number one non-negotiable is I will always lead with my own vulnerability. You're always going to hear me share the tough story first. I can't expect you to do something that I'm not willing to do. I really believe that. And so I have to lead with my own vulnerability, number one. Number two, I don't do shame, blame, and guilt. I think we as a culture right now capitalize on shame, blame, and guilt. Might take a screenshot of what that person said, that politician, that public figure, and then share it all over social media and talk about how horrible a human they are. Guess what? That, as a teacher, that does not promote learning. What that does is it causes people to dig their heels in. Or they will change in front of you, but when they go home, they're going to be the same person. And I'll just give you a 12-year-old example. So I had a student named Jerome. I loved Jerome. I had Jerome for French immersion, so I taught every subject in French. I speak 4 languages. I'm a walking disruption of narratives. I'm a baller and a multilingual person, which I love just like switching into Dutch sometimes. Just messing with people. I love messing with Dutch people because they don't expect Dutch to come out of my mouth. And they're like, like, you do speak Dutch, right? You are from the Netherlands, right? Anyway, but I was a French immersion teacher in Tacoma, and I had a student named Jerome. And Jerome came to class every day the first week of school as a 6th grader and got into a fight every single day. Every single day got into a fight. He would create a fight somewhere. And at the end of that first week, I pulled Jerome outside of the classroom, and I said, Jerome, what is going on with you? I know this can't be you. You can't be enjoying this. And Jerome was bigger than every other kid in the class, and he burst into tears. And he said, Miss Jones, my dad just got locked up. And my mom is working 3 jobs, and sometimes when I get home, she's not there. She's not there when I wake up in the morning. And I just feel alone, and I'm kind of angry about it. And I said, Jerome, I see you, buddy. I see you. Guess what? Our class is going to be your family right now. And do you know, Jerome never got into a fight again. And I had him 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. But sometimes Jerome would come to school, and he'd be a little off. And he would just blurt out in the middle of class, or he would be banging on the desk. I don't know if you've ever been in a classroom with a kid that's banging on the desk because they just can't help themselves. Maybe you're that kid. Anyway, but I had a little agreement that I worked out with Jerome is if Jerome was struggling to stay focused, I would just come next to him and put my hand on his desk lightly first. And Jerome knew that when Miss Jones shows up and puts her, okay, I could get myself together. If Jerome started like pushing the kid next to him and it was just getting a little out of control, I would come and just lightly put my 2 fingers on his shoulder, not a whole. There's a difference between this and this. I would just put 2 fingers on his shoulder. And Jerome knew then, okay, I got to really get it together. If I put my hand on the back of Jerome's chair, Jerome knew I'm going to get up and just go take some circles at the back of the classroom. I never had to shame Jerome. But Jerome knew because we had communicated, he knew, okay. He needed help just getting himself together. Y'all, do you know Jerome finished my class with an A? And I didn't give him that A. He earned that A. Because we had the kind of relationship where I was not shaming, blaming, and guilting him. I think too often we're shaming, blaming, and guilting people on social media and public spaces. And there's always a why they behave the way they do. Come back to Mr. Phil McGraw. Now, he is an audience, and not as big an audience as he used to have. You have to have an app to watch the show now. But here's the thing I watched. When I got on stage with him, and there were 2 other people who were interviewed before me, and he roasted one of them, just dehumanizing. And I have since become her friend. It was so dehumanizing. I was off stage just my heart was crying for this woman who was just trying to advocate for DEI work, and he just roasted her. But when I got on stage, I realized he was really squirming in his chair. He's 73 years old. My husband's had a hip replacement. I watched my husband do that for a year when his hip really hurt. And I realized by the end of the show, he's been sitting up here for over an hour. He's really hurting. Here's the other thing that is true for Phil McGraw. Phil McGraw used to be a big deal. And he's not so much anymore. And he's trying to be relevant. And in trying to be relevant, he's trying to incite audiences. What's the best way to do that? Bring people together to fight. So even though I don't excuse his behavior, I got curious about Phil McGraw. Okay, why did he show up to me that way? It's not actually about Erin Jones. He doesn't know me. In fact, he had not done his research. So he made the mistake of saying on live TV that nobody earns their way into college with affirmative action. He said that out loud. And I had to say to him, I got accepted at Princeton because I graduated high school with a 3.99 GPA, spoke 4 languages fluently, played 3 varsity sports, of which I was captain of all 3 years in a row, and MVP, and played 2 instruments in the honors band. And he just looked at me. He had not done his research. But here's why I share that. We all have a Phil McGraw in our lives right now. Who's hurting. They feel irrelevant. They feel like things are disappearing for them. I have this perspective. I may get into this later, but I was adopted by 2 white people in 1971 who were basically disowned by their families for adopting a little black girl. My dad is about to be 80 years old in a couple weeks. And my dad, when Pride happened 2 years ago, I don't know why this hit him 2 years ago, but when Pride happened, he turned to my mom and said, when do I get a month for me? Y'all, my mom is a huge Hillary Clinton fan. And she turned to him and said, a month for you? Got every day, 365 days of the year are yours. Be quiet. And they are very sweet people usually, but she was not happy, and she called me right afterwards and said, do you know what your dad said? I said, oh, Mom. But here's the analogy that I came up with about my dad, and people like my dad, my dad is not like Phil McGraw at all. However, he's an older white male, and I want to give you an analogy that I hope will help you think about people like that. My dad has had the spotlight on him his entire life. All the news was about people who look like him. The history books, who we read about, that spotlight has been on him his whole life. And now what's happening is we're pulling the spotlight back. We're not taking it off him. We're pulling it back so we can see the whole stage. And that feels like oppression because he's been used to having the spotlight on him. And I've had to explain to my Dad, I'm not kicking you off the stage. I'm just asking you to share the stage. And he was like, oh. I get it now. But what if people like Phil could get it? Right? And I would invite people like Phil who have decent-sized platforms. Sometimes you need to take yourself off the stage and invite some other people to be on the stage. That takes a lot, though. And it takes a willingness to not have to be in power. Takes a willingness to not have to be the one with all the answers anymore. And that's a tough ask of people. It's a tough ask of people. But this brave space, no shame, blame, or guilt, but also I want to challenge us to get curious about people who are not like us. So for some of us, that means getting curious about super conservative, right-wing, politically, religiously people. For some of you, it means super left-wing people. For some of you, it means immigrant folks who don't speak English fluently. For some of us, it means trans people. I want to challenge us in a brave space to get curious about people who are not like us, and especially those you don't agree with or understand. That's not easy, y'all. Especially right now, it's not an easy ask, I realize that, and I think it's our only way forward. So for me, the non-negotiables of a brave space are, number one, I have to lead with my own vulnerability. And I recognize that for people in different identities, that hits a different way. There's a different level of impact that has based on identity. So be aware of what your identities are and what that means for you. And know yourself. Don't give away things. One of my rules for myself is I don't share a story that will make me cry in front of people I don't know. I'm very intentional about that. You don't get to see me cry about a thing that I have not healed from yet. And that's just as a speaker, it's a lot. I mean, so I will share some stories, but know that I've had to work through stuff to be able to share those stories. I don't share a story immediately that I'm still healing from, because that is a re-traumatization of myself. So I have some pretty strict rules for myself as a public speaker. So think about, for yourself, what is the appropriate level of vulnerability? And I want to challenge you to push it a little bit. Just push it. Practice just pushing it a little bit. And then number two, no shame, blame, or guilt. That also means for yourself when you make a mistake. You are going to make a mistake. Every one of us in here is going to make a mistake. And when you do, are you willing to say, man, I messed up there. I'm so sorry. And not if my words offended you, I'm sorry. That is not an apology. But hey, I just said this thing, and that was so hurtful, and I'm really sorry. So no shame, blame, or guilt for others, but also for yourself. And then lastly, I want to encourage us to stay curious and get curious about people who are around us. So posture 1, gratitude. Posture 2, create a brave space. Posture 3 is something I'm calling pause. How many of you say or do dumb stuff when you're tired? Imagine if every world leader paused before they responded to stuff. Seriously. Imagine if you paused before you hit send on that email. Right? Or you got a TikTok video and, oh my gosh, I wanted to imagine if you just paused. I want to encourage us that one of the most powerful things we can do is just pause. Just pause. Get yourself together. Breathe, take some deep breaths. So I really practiced this on the Phil show. I had lots of time to practice that. Okay, I'm not going to respond to that comment. I want to, but Erin, I don't have anything helpful to say right now. So I'm just going to, sometimes we think we have to respond to everything. You don't, actually. You are not the savior of the world. If you have nothing thoughtful to say, don't say anything until you have something thoughtful to say. So my rule for me is if I, in the moment, cannot say something that will build the conversation, I will pause. Now, I've had some people ask, well, what if someone says something really racist or sexist or homophobic in a meeting and you are not sure what to say? I will say, hey, I heard that. Can we talk about that later? And that lets everybody know that I heard that. We're not letting it go. And we're going to get to it later, but I don't have the best thing to say right now. And I want to encourage you, if you say that, make sure you go back later. Don't just leave it then. Go back later and say something, but wait until you're able to say something thoughtful. Because there's nothing worse than somebody word vomits in a meeting and you word vomit right back. That doesn't move the conversation in a helpful direction. So I want to encourage us to just pause. Here is a strategy that I use personally that I started using when I was a teacher that is really powerful. How many of you can count to 10 in a language other than the one you use at work every day? Okay, here's a strategy that's really powerful. If you will, when you can feel your body getting really upset, and I'll give you a personal example. So I worked for 2 state superintendents, and one of them, who shall remain nameless, said one day in a meeting, I was in an executive cabinet meeting, and this person said, Erin, would you tell your people to stop calling me? And I knew in my gut what he was saying, but I was like, I'm going to play dumb here. My people? Which people are you talking about? And he said, you know your people. Your people are calling me every day. I said, the Jones people do not have your cell number. They are not calling you. And I knew where he was going, but I needed him to say it out loud. And I said, so the Joneses are not calling. Who are you talking about? And he said, the black people are calling me. I said, oh, wait, the black people? Which black people? The Jones family? Like, who are my black people? And you could see the wheels spinning in his head, and he realized he'd stepped in it. But then he said, you know, Erin, I grew up poor on a farm. I'm not even going to take that to the end, because y'all know where this is going, and not to a good place. And I started seeing red. And I'm the only woman in the room and the only person of color on cabinet. And I am seeing red, and I know I'm going to lose my job today. And I start counting backwards in Dutch. And so here's the strategy. When you're seeing red and you're so angry that you know you're about to say something you know you will regret, count backwards. So I'll do this in Dutch because it's very guttural and it just makes my brain focus. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. By the time I get to 0, I am typically pretty calm. Maybe not 100%, but much better than 10 seconds ago, right? And so if you find yourself in a conversation where that happens to you and I often will do this there are times where I have to walk out of the room and I will say, hey, I need 20 seconds, and I'll step outside and do it out loud. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. I need to get it out of my system. But in that meeting, I can remember where I was sitting. I counted backwards from 10. And I was able to say to him, I said, you know what? I'm going to use a sports analogy because I know you were an athlete. And I just want to give you a sports analogy that maybe will help you understand how what you said just landed on me. And this is not a perfect analogy, sir, but here's an analogy. My people, I said, no, your people. I know you were poor. I know you were poor. But you started on first base poor. And I'm not saying you didn't work hard, because you did work hard. But you started on first base. My people are trying to get on the field. And he was like, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. And then he went and shared that story in front of a bunch of black people about 2 hours later. And I was like, buddy, I was trying to save you from this. You were not supposed to tell on yourself. But I share all that because I absolutely use that strategy. And so I want to encourage you to just pause before you respond to a thing. So I want to do a real teachery thing here. And so I'm going to give you a little strategy that I use. I'm going to see if I can move this up here. I want to do something with you all that I did in a speech probably about 8 months ago. And it just kind of clicked. So I actually have a TikTok video about this, and all the Supreme Court justices did this yesterday. And I heard yesterday that every speaker after me did it too. So I obviously taught some Supreme Court justices something really useful. So I hope it will be useful to you too. How many of you can think of a time where you have been tempted to make someone feel small because of something they said or did? Anybody ever been in that spot? Okay. How many of you have ever been willing to sacrifice a relationship in order to be right? Like you've been so in need of being right in a relationship that you've been willing to put that relationship on the line. So I'm going to give you something to think about next time that happens for you. Maybe you're in a meeting with a potential offender and they say something that really pisses you off. I want you to think about this. So everybody put your hands out like this. So if you have something in your hands, put it down. I want everybody's hands out like this. And I want you to think in your head about the last time you got into a conflict, maybe with your partner, maybe with a colleague, maybe with your child, maybe with a neighbor, maybe with your Uncle Phil. And I want you to think about how you show up to that person. And I'm going to challenge you to think about this. Let's call each other in and up into the best version of ourselves, not out and down into shame. Okay, let's try that again. Let's call each other in and up into the best version of ourselves, not out and down into shame. Now say it with me. Let's call each other in and up into the best version of ourselves, not out and down into shame. So I taught that to all of our deputies for state government, and I was in a meeting in person with some of them about 3 months ago. And a couple of them got into it a little bit, and I watched one of them under the table do this. And I was like, yes! But the reason I do this is because if you can add a physical element to it, it helps us really internalize it. And so I want you to think the next time you are in a really difficult conversation with someone, I want you to think about that. Am I calling them in? And I do this with my husband. Am I calling him in and up, or am I trying to be his mom? I am not his mom. Am I going to add to this conversation and lift it, or am I going to add shame to this conversation? So I want you to really think about that. So gratitude, brave space, pause. I want to end, and then I'm going to let people ask a couple questions. I don't often do that, but we have a little bit of time, and I just feel compelled to let you ask a couple questions. I want to end by reading the poem that I wrote to open my book. So I wrote a book. I actually started writing my first book while teaching at Jason Lee Middle School in Tacoma. I was writing 2 fiction novels at the same time, and I was handwriting them because it was before computers, laptops. I know some of y'all can't imagine not having a laptop, but I did not have a laptop. And so I was handwriting these 2 books, and I had them in my backpack in my car. And I used to host a late-night basketball program for kids on the hilltop in Tacoma. And one day I was coaching at this camp, and when I came out to get my car, it was gone. Well, one of my former students had gotten jumped into a gang, and their challenge to him was steal a car and take it in a joyride. And he stole my car because he knew where my keys were. But what happened is one of his brothers in the gang took my backpack and strew the entire thing all over the hilltop, and it rained that night. And I lost my 2 books that I was handwriting. And I'd written about 70 pages of each of them, and it took 20 more years to be able to write a book. But I wrote this book after George Floyd was murdered. I told you all that I was adopted. I was actually the product of an affair. My white mother was married to a white man, and she realized she was pregnant by not his child. And she knew I was going to pop out brown. There was no abortion in 1971 in Minnesota, and she knew she was going to have to carry this baby to term, and it was going to pop out brown. And her husband gave her an ultimatum and said, either the baby or me. And she chose him. And so she would leave me in a hospital in Minneapolis. And I started life in the foster care system. And one day, I was really fortunate when at 3 months old, a white couple from northern Minnesota showed up at the Children's Home Society and said, we want to adopt a baby that nobody wants. Who are the babies in our state that nobody adopts? And the director said, Black babies. And it is no different today than it was in 71. About 95% of Black babies in Minnesota will never be adopted. And if you know the data around foster care and what happens, I am one of the few. And I was adopted at 3 months old, and my parents were basically disowned. They were told by both of their good Christian families, why couldn't you just have adopted one of ours? But my dad is one of the most courageous humans I know. He's also the nerdiest math guy you will ever meet. Horn-rimmed glasses and all. But my dad decided to take me to meet his family on Christmas Day that year. And when my grandfather took a look at me, he said, she's so cute, how could we not love her? Of course I was cute. I mean, what 6-month-old baby is not cute? God makes them cute or we would not take care of them. But I received the blessing from my grandfather. And so I became part of the Adamson family. And what's great about the Adamson family is we are all 6 feet tall or taller. We are all basketball players. We are all teachers. We've all published at least 1 book. And we all sing and write music. Except for they are all toe-headed blondes. And they're so white, they're clear. But I love that side of the family. My other side of the family, my grandma called me the N-word until I was 30. And that's a story you can read in the book. But my mom's side of the family has been really tough. And they still live in Minnesota. And my mom's brother lives right outside of Minneapolis. And the day after George Floyd was murdered, my mom's brother sent her an email. And it said this. If black people would just follow the law, they wouldn't get killed by police. My uncle sent that to my mom, knowing that I am her daughter, knowing that I'm married to a black man, knowing that I have 3 black children. And it was so painful. My mom called me about an hour after she received the email. She said, Erin, I've been trying to practice, pause. I don't know how to respond to him, and I've been trying to practice, and I said, Mom, he actually doesn't deserve a response. You know, sometimes we don't need to respond to people, right? We give away our energy to people who don't deserve it. So don't respond to him, Mom. Ignore it. I know you can't ignore it emotionally, but he doesn't deserve for you to put writing on a piece of paper right now. But what happened as a result of that, and then watching a church community that I had invested 25 years in called me demonic for even wanting to talk about race, I decided I had to write a book. And so this book is my offering to an America that is really hurting. And it's me taking the pain of abandonment and challenge and rejection and success and saying to America, here are some of my stories and recommendations for how we heal. But I wrote this poem the week after George Floyd was murdered, and it's not about George Floyd, it's just about me. I want to be the me I didn't have as a little girl. I want you to love your hair and your skin and your curves and your height or lack thereof. I want you to know you are smart enough and pretty enough and strong enough. I want you to know it's okay to not fit in, because the girls who say they do are really just pretending. I want to be the me I didn't have as a young adult. I want you to know you don't need a man. I want you to know you don't have to know where you will be 20 years from now. I want you to know mistakes are part of the journey. I want to be the me I didn't have as an executive. I want you to know your voice matters. I want you to know you belong there. I want you to embrace opportunities to learn from other great people. I want to be the me I didn't have as a politician. I want you to know you can be your full self, even if they say it will cost you the election. I want you to be the author of your own story. I want you to maintain your integrity, because you'll have to live with yourself afterwards, win or lose. I want to be the me I didn't have, so you can be the you were meant to be. And then I want to close by, and then I guess I am out of time. I want to close, but I will be here signing books in the coffee. So if you just want to come talk, you don't want to buy a book, that's fine. I will be here after by the coffee section. But here's the last page of the book. Stay grateful for every encounter. Stay curious about those around you. Stay learning. Don't be paralyzed by not having the exact right answer. Keep moving and speaking and disrupting and investing. Keep being and building the bridges we need to heal us. Do you see me on the track? I am running in front of you, behind you, alongside you, reminding you when your lungs burn to keep going, reminding you to keep your eyes on the prize. Run through the finish line, my friends. You've got this. We've got this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin.